Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, and welcome to this edition 50, would you believe, of the Tech Takeaways podcast. As I'm going to say as ever, as usual, as more often than not, I'm joined by my World Wild co-host, Jason Fitzgerald.
Thank you.
I don't even know what that means.
Hello, World Wild. That sounds good. Yeah, it sounds exciting.
Yeah.
I want to be World Wild.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
during this episode, or do feel free to put in the comments whatever that might mean, and then we'll try and live it out for you, and we'll give that a go. But it is episode 50, so for those who stuck around for the previous 49, you're probably locked in now, and more fool you for sticking around for so much of this nonsense. But we're going to do something, as it's episode 50, we're going to do something that there's episodes that we come up with as an idea that gets Jason very excited, and this is one of those episodes. So we're going to be talking about the well, I'll tell you what, Jace, why don't you introduce what we're going to talk about, being as you get excited? We're
talking about identity. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, what did I tell you? So we're going to look at a couple of areas with this. I think probably a little bit around some of the challenges that identity presents, but also some of the threats that poorly managed identity presents. I think is maybe a way to think about it.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I've done 49 other ones of these, and by now,
season pro by now.
Yeah, I feel like we should know what we're doing by now.
We're going to get badges.
Yeah. So why don't kick off, Jason? Talk about your view of identity. How do you see identity? What's some of the challenges that you see?
Okay, so when we're talking about identity, really what we're talking about in IT is how to securely identify the users to services or infrastructure that you are using as part of your business. We're not talking particularly about who the user is. We're talking about their access to platforms. But one of the things that I often see is this kind of confusion between identity and passwords or accounts, and I think that's where a lot of confusion comes in. I think the reason for that is when we look at different accounts. So let's name a few. Okay, so let's say Amazon, let's say Dropbox, let's say Microsoft accounts. Okay, so I could have a login for every single one of those that has a completely different email address for every single one of them. But ultimately, it's me.
Yeah,
I am me. I am the only one. I'm the one and only. It is me. I'm logging into all of those. World Wild me. Yeah. So I'm logging into each of those services, and what we often see, and you mentioned it from the off about poorly managed, and I think we will get into it a little bit, is when you forget that the user might be logging in with a different email address into different platforms, you start to lose control of what the user is doing in those platforms and the manageability of it ultimately. So when we're talking about identity, we're talking about a cohesive management strategy for the users across all services that you're using. So if I'm logging into Amazon, if I'm logging into Dropbox, if I'm logging into M365, as an IT admin, whoever's admin in my account can recognize me as doing that and close access where they need to.
So that's a really interesting explanation as well, because I think that kind of talks to the problem that identity presents, because that complexity. So, that idea of, don't think of identity. Identity is not just a username and a password. Identity is not even necessarily a human, which is maybe another episode in itself, kind of machine identities. Yeah. But that idea that identity is built up around multiple things, and that we will have multiple usernames, multiple credentials in potentially multiple locations. And actually, as an enterprise, you're trying to manage all of that. And I think that complexity obviously leads to a couple of areas. One, it makes managing it really, really difficult. Yeah. And I think the other thing that it leads to, and this is something that I think we're seeing increasingly, is the massive security threat that brings as well. So, poorly managed identity is a huge risk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we wind back to, let's say, 5 years ago, so most companies are maybe dabbling with cloud, but maybe not gone fully in yet. But infrastructures are, generally Active Directory on site. So a couple of identity servers on site for users to be able to log in to access company resources. And you can access your email system with that login because it's a company resource. And you can access your file shares on that same login because it's a company resource, all on the same network. But then if you've got let's say Dropbox, and you've got to, I don't know, for some reason, put some company files in Dropbox to share them with a client externally, for example.
or leak them out just for the heck of it.
Or leak some data, yeah, however. How do you then link that back in? Well, unless you've got some kind of identity synchronization, you can't. So if the company then, or if the user then leaves the company and you close down the account, you think, okay, well, look, they've left. They can't access their email system, they can't access any files. But you've still got access to Dropbox because you've not closed that. Yeah. So if we're talking about kind of like a cybersecurity risk, and managing identity well is almost managing risk at the same time. The better you manage it, the lower the risk. Yeah. But in a poorly managed environment where you've got, maybe Dropbox is there for an account of a user that no longer exists, no longer works for the company, well, they can still go and log into Dropbox. That account still exists with Dropbox. They can still use that to launch attacks against people, maybe do some, sending out of files, phishing attempts, whatever it is, it still exists. So the best strategy now in the modern world, when we're talking about identity, we can't not talk about identity providers, Entra ID, Okta, those kind of systems where you've got one identity, and the holy grail really is to integrate that single point of identity to every other system that you're using, right? So if you're using Dropbox, if you're using, some kind of DNS administration panel for your company, if you're using some social media, that all links back to your company through Entra ID, and that's manageable in one place. And the benefit of that is, when the person leaves, if the person leaves, you can close down that account, you can manage that account appropriately and put security around that account. So a control might be, if you're accessing our company social media, we want you to do MFA on the account, and we can enforce that through Entra ID. The social media platform itself may not support MFA, but we can enforce that as a company management strategy. So that's managing the identity properly.
And I think on the plus side as well, you can see that, so you mentioned there kind of a bunch of, maybe it's we've talked about likes of Box and Dropbox, and you've got Microsoft 365, and then you've got things like Salesforce and Zoom and Slack and, a whole bunch of tools that organizations are using on a regular basis. And the traditional routes, so each of those have got their own identity platform. So, I could go to Salesforce and create a whole bunch of
an account,
and like you said before, I think that the risk with that is that when a user leaves an organization, unless you've got a process that goes away and removes those users from each of those applications, that user then will still have that account. So it's interesting that I think, so that idea of consolidating into a single platform makes a lot of sense. And I think on the plus side is what we're also seeing is all of those vendors, those other SaaS vendors SaaS vendors particularly are tending to recognize that. So all of them. So if we take Entra ID, the rebranded Azure AD for those who've not caught up yet. But if we're going to take Entra ID, most of the major SaaS applications that we speak to and we use have that kind of capability built in. So they will accept that kind of single sign-on capability from Entra ID as your main source. And so you log into Entra ID, then that kind of almost passes through that authentication to those other applications. So I mean, first thing, is that difficult to do? And secondly, what are the, so maybe makes life a little bit easier, but are there other benefits from doing that as well?
Okay, so is it difficult to do? Mileage will vary depending on the platform. Some, as you've said there, will support native integration. And often it's a case of, follow the guides and set it up. But generally, no, it's not overly complex to get these set up. Probably the more time-consuming element is in a larger organization working out which ones you need to integrate, because you don't know which services end users are using, unless you've got a directory, which a lot of companies don't. So if we're talking about, the Salesforce, for example, we can do single sign-on through that. So user logs into a machine, as long as it's a company machine, they go to Salesforce website, automatically logs them in. That's fine. That's all good. Some providers, it may be a little bit more complex. And when we say that, we're talking about kind of SAML integration, so SAML integration. Essentially, there's a little bit more setup, but it's worth it. For the risk that you are exposed to of not doing it and the reward that you get for doing it, it's well worth the investment in time, because if you think about a larger environment, an enterprise company, for example, maybe 1,000 users, you don't ever want to be in that position where you can't accurately manage your user accounts. So it is always worth setting up.
Well, it's that kind of thing, isn't it? So if you're, it's Entra ID, or it's one of the well-known platforms out there, Ping Identity and Okta.
Yeah.
That these guys, it means that there's only one place to manage these identities as well.
Single source of truth.
Yeah. So once you take that user, so you enable or disable that user within that platform, it will then control that kind of that access to all of those other applications. That's a huge benefit.
Exactly, and think of it as a from a cost management perspective as well. There's benefits there. If we're talking about you're being licensed based on the number of active users in that platform. Well, of course, when you remove a user account, you want the license to fall away, because if it doesn't, you're still paying for that license even though you're not using it. So
you were saying to me actually before we recorded this about the, and this is probably getting a little bit niche, but actually that idea of using groups within Entra ID as a way of better managing that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for anyone that knows me, I'm a big fan of Entra ID and groups. So we use groups.
I think he's got a T-shirt with that on. Is that right?
I think I've got a group of T-shirts with that on.
Very good.
Yeah. So
that's sharp. 50 episodes in. I like that.
Thanks very much. Yeah, getting better, more refined every day. So what we can do with Entra ID groups is essentially define groups of users however we want. So we might say, if you're a member of the marketing department, we're going to put you in a marketing group. If you're a member of the sales department, we're going to put you in a sales group. If you're a member of both groups, then that's fine. You can be a member of multiple groups. But where that's really powerful is you can start to build up almost like a certain level of automation with things. So an example would be, if I am in a Microsoft licensing group for E3 licenses, my account gets licensed for all of the E3 licenses. And because I'm in a marketing group as well, I get single sign-on to our company social media pages, because I need that as part of my job role. And then if I transition from marketing into sales, I get moved from the marketing group and into the sales group. And all of a sudden, social media access is blocked off my account. I shouldn't have access to it. It's no longer part of my job role. But because I'm now in the sales group, I get access to Salesforce. And if I leave the sales group, and I get removed from that group, I get removed from Salesforce, the license goes with it, we're now no longer paying for it. So it's about managing that whole experience better. So we're managing the risk with the identities in the platforms, and potentially you could be saving on licensing by doing it as well.
So it sounds to me like there's kind of three really big benefits with better identity management. You've got an operational benefit, so make your life easier. Management becomes much easier.
Yeah.
You've got a cost benefit. So actually that kind of thing you just talked about there, where you are doing kind of license management. So, using identity as a way of ensuring that you're not over provisioning users into platforms where you're paying a cost a month.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, there's the security impact of doing so as well. So actually poorly managed identities, which is why phishing is still such a prevalent attack vector, because, identity and usernames and passwords, and part of identity, usernames and password is the thing that the kind of the bad guys are after. So better cost control, reduce operational overhead, and improve security. Sounds like three pretty good reasons to, to take identity management seriously.
Definitely, yeah.
So if people are listening to this and thinking, well, actually, definitely, that sounds like something I should be doing, and it is. Is there a couple of tips? Is there a couple of tech takeaways that we can give people in terms of kind of getting started on that journey? Yeah,
absolutely. So the tech takeaway I would give is look to see if you're using any kind of managed identity platform now. So Entra ID for those that are using Microsoft 365 services. Google Suite does a lot of it as well, or Okta. So they're kind of the big three. There are others in there as well. Take a look to see if you're using any of them already. And if you are, and you've got user accounts in there, take a look to see what else you're using outside of that platform, and see the integration guides on how you can easily link them in. If you can easily link them in, it's a win-win. Go and link them in. Start to manage your identity that way.
Yep, sounds like a good tip.
Yep.
It sounds like a good way to wrap episode 50. So so here we go. 50 episodes in. Jace, personal highlight from the other 49?
Personal highlight from the other 49. So my favourite episode was Beyond the Firewall. I love that episode. I think it technically it was great. We had a great time doing it as well. That stands out to me as one of the big ones. What about yourself?
I don't have a favourite because that's like asking me which my favourite child is. All podcast epides are great. Okay. I mean, Jace has been able to pick a favourite child. I don't know what that says.
I've only got one.
Well, that's true. So that's a good thing. But hey, but Jace, it's been fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for your insight on this episode and all the previous episodes as well. Hey, if you've enjoyed this episode, this is number 50. If this is the first time you've joined us, there's 49 others of these to go check out.
Click back.
And if you want to make sure you catch the next 50, then do subscribe. You can subscribe here on YouTube with some button that's down here. If I point in this direction, it's down there somewhere.
General direction.
And of course, you can subscribe in all good homes of podcasts. So please go ahead and do that. And if you've got any comments or any kind of any topics you'd like us to cover at some point in the future, then just leave us a comment and we'll do our best to cover that in our own unique way with our bite-sized chunks of tech insight. So until next time, thanks for joining us on Tech Takeaways, and we'll see you soon.